Coming up, she's Minnesota's 50th Lieutenant Governor. Peggy Flanagan joins us to talk re-election, education, and Line 3. Plus, we'll take a look at the contributions of 3 leaders who have recently died and how each made their mark as president of the National Congress of American Indians. I'm Mark Trahant. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from Indian Country Today.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. Construction of the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline is complete. A communication specialist for the company confirmed to Indian Country Today that the project went into service on October 1st. The pipeline spans the U.S. through North Dakota and Minnesota. When finished, the pipeline carries tar sands oil. It comes after nearly 8 years of opposition from Indigenous people and allies. While the pipeline wasn't fully stopped, water protectors are still claiming a victory on a number of fronts. Winona LeDuc is executive director of Honor the Earth. She spoke to water protectors saying, quote, "Your brave efforts have reshaped the world's views on the climate crisis that we are in." Earlier this month, Honor the Earth sponsored a celebration on Madeline Island in Wisconsin to claim victory over the fossil fuel industry. The water protectors say they want to work on forging a path ahead to heal from the trauma they've been through in protesting the construction of the pipeline. To learn more, search for the headline, "Line 3 Opposition Lives On. The Cleanup Begins" at IndianCountryToday.com. States have taken various approaches to sports betting. In Connecticut, tribes have exclusive rights, while Arizona has opened the gates well beyond tribal gaming. As Karina Dominguez reports, one tribe is being scrutinized for opening a sports book on the same property as the NBA team plays.
With sports betting underway across most of the U.S., tribal gaming compacts with states were amended, and some are maintaining more exclusivity than others. Tribal gaming consultant Victor Rocha said sports betting is an existential fight for tribal gaming, particularly online gambling. He says the giant has woken up. Tribes had 20 years in the gaming industry, and now professional sports are eager to get into sports betting. Connecticut rolled out sports betting regulations, allowing state and tribal governments to offer in-person and online wagers, while Arizona is opening the floodgates to corporations eager to get in on the action. Arizona Governor Doug Ducey passed an emergency measure which allowed sports betting in the state to start on the same day the NFL season kicked off. He ensured there were enough licenses for all of the state's professional sports teams, but not for all 22 federally recognized tribes.
Well, I think with something like this, you always want to see responsibility. This will bring additional revenue, which is needed across our state and in our tribal communities. And you also need balance and responsibility with anything like this.
Although online sports bets exceeded expectations on its opening day, Rocha said not one of those bets were placed on tribal lands. What's more, the Arizona Diamondbacks avoided the same conflict of interest accusations the Mohegan tribe received, despite similar circumstances. The Mohegan Sun FanDuel Sportsbook is located on the same property as the casino and the arena for the WNBA team the tribe owns, the Connecticut Sun. Many are concerned there aren't transparent firewalls in place to ensure the team management and those setting the lines aren't influencing each other. The tribe suspended WNBA wagers until next season. In states that have yet to legalize sports betting, tribes are working to maintain exclusivity, but many have legal hurdles to overcome, with some even taking it to the ballot. I'm Karina Dominguez, reporting for ICT.
New Zealand's first Indigenous female Governor General was sworn into a 5-year term last week. Cindy Kiro is being appointed to the largely ceremonial role as representative of Queen Elizabeth II in the South Pacific nation, as she was able to take her oath in both English and Maori. The new Governor General has had a long career advocating for children. She was given the honorific title Dame for her services to community, and she says she hopes to inspire Maori girls. Kiro emphasized the need to build community spirit through outreach and said she wants to celebrate society's unsung heroes.
I will connect with new migrants and former refugees and celebrate the many diverse cultures and religions gifted to our nation by those who have chosen to make New Zealand their home.
Dame Cindy is the third Maori Governor General after Sir Paul Reeves and Sir Jerry Metaperi, and the fourth woman to hold the title. Exciting news in Oklahoma City. The Chickasaw Nation will be starting construction next year on a $300 million resort. This picture right here was released from the Chickasaw Nation. The resort name will be known as Okana Resort. It will include a 400-room hotel and indoor-outdoor water park, retail, dining, and conference facilities. The development will also feature a Native American market and amphitheater to provide space to showcase Indigenous art. This announcement came a little more than a month ago when the First Americans Museum opened in Oklahoma City. The resort and indoor water park is being designed to complement the museum's focus on Indigenous American cultures. And those are the headlines for Indian Country Today. I'm Mark Trahant. Coming up, Holly Cook Macarro joins us to remember the legacies of Earl Oldperson, Ed Driving Hawk, and Leon Cook. But first, a conversation with Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. Peggy Flanagan was elected as Minnesota's Lieutenant Governor in 2018. She is the first Native woman to be elected to that office and only the second woman to be elected to any statewide executive office after Denise Juneau. Minnesota was the center of a national racial reckoning in 2020 following the murder of George Floyd. She joins us now to talk about her reelection campaign and some issues. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, let's start with the announcement last week that you and the governor are running for re-election.
We are. So it was an exciting week last week. I think, we have more work to do. We were able to step up during the pandemic and make sure that we kept food on the table for Minnesota families, had one of the strongest eviction moratoriums in the country and kept people housed and kept children and families healthy and safe. And so, that has been our response to the pandemic. And we have a lot more work that we want to do to make sure that folks have access to high quality healthcare and education, and continue the work of making sure that our young people are seen and heard and valued, and made sure that Minnesota is the best place in the country to raise a child. So we got more work to do, and I'm eager to get it done.
It's funny because we're always dealing with multiple levels of time, and 4 years sounds like a long time, but in your position, it probably has gone by in a blink.
Time has no meaning anymore. So, the other day someone said, would you sign up to do it again if you knew, now, you knew then what you know now? And the answer is absolutely yes. It has been the honor of my lifetime to be in this role. But also, I'm really glad it was us and not the other guys who are leading in this moment. And we've been able to take this seriously. But we have a lot of healing to do, both from the pandemic and also, as you mentioned, the racial reckoning. That was the spotlight was on Minnesota, and making sure that we're embedding equity into everything that we do. So 4 more years, I think would be helpful to accomplish the agenda that we want to see.
Let's talk about the conversation you're having people with racial equality and how we take those steps. What are you hearing from people, and what are the next steps?
Well, I think one of the things in Minnesota, and for your viewers who are familiar with our state, there's something that you hear called Minnesota nice. And oftentimes what that means is that we are passive aggressive when we talk about tough stuff. And racism and discrimination against Black, Indigenous communities of color is something that has been happening in our state since our state was founded. And so being able to tell the truth, and I call those like who wants pie moments, where we're having a difficult conversation and an important conversation, and suddenly someone will switch the topic to food and say, who wants pie, when things get uncomfortable. We can't do that anymore, because this is why we are in the position that we're in, is that we've been brushing a lot of stuff under the rug and being unwilling to talk about it and to tell the truth. And so because of that, that's one of the reasons why, in this state, it's one of the best places to live and one of the best places to grow up if you're white. If you are Black or Indigenous or come from an immigrant community or community of color, we have some of the largest disparities in the country. And so being able to tell the truth about why those disparities exist, so then we can have policies that help come correct many of the circumstances that we find, that's what's needed and necessary. And I think Minnesotans are ready for it.
How do you deal with the deep rancor in politics these days?
That's a big question. But I think here's what I know. I know that there are moments when we are all called to serve our community, and there are different roles that we have in service to our community. I've been taught, right, in my community that we are all in a circle, and you step into the middle of the circle when you are needed and when your people need you to serve, and then you step out and allow someone else to step in. And so it is simply in this moment, it is my time to serve. And I believe passionately in making sure that people are heard and that the voices of folks who have been historically underrepresented and unrepresented are at the table. And, that is what gets me up every day. And we've been able to see, though, many of the things that we've been working on now come to fruition. We had our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force that was passed that now has become the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Office. We've seen the codification of Executive Order 1924, which calls for consultation with all state agencies and state government with our 11 Native nations in the state of Minnesota. And now with Indigenous Education for All, making sure that all of our young people in Minnesota know about the history, the culture of Indigenous people in the state, but also that we are contemporary people. That's exciting. And I know that is work that wouldn't happen unless I was here and unless our just passionate and diverse leaders who are part of our state legislature were here too. And so it's tough. And there's a lot of opportunity. And frankly, we've never been better off with fewer Native women at the table. And so I want to make that table bigger and make sure that there's more of us here, because I think we do a pretty good job governing.
I do want to ask you about Indigenous education since you brought it up. And over time, Indigenous education for all has a chance to change the way people see Native communities as neighbors. Are you seeing any early indications of that?
I am. I think, one of the things that is just so powerful about this moment is that our young people are just ready for it. They want to know, right? We live in Minnesota, which is Minnesota Sota Makoche, right? Which is a Dakota word. And there are Indigenous place names all over our state. Our young people are using Indigenous language every single day, and so are Minnesotans. And as we've talked to tribal leaders, this was the number one thing that we heard, that we want Minnesotans to know who we are, that we have always been here, we are still here, and we will continue to be here into the future. It's not a secret, I've told this story before, but when I was in the legislature, there were some of my colleagues who were surprised to know that Native people still exist. And these are folks who are serving in elected office. And that is, I think, demonstrates very clearly the need to ensure that everyone in this state knows about Native culture and history, but also not just our culture and history, incorporating those lessons into science and into math. I want my little girl, who is a third grader, to be able to walk into a classroom, see a teacher who looks like her, who sees curriculum and artwork on the walls reflecting who she is, so that she is valued when she walks into that classroom, and then in turn values for education. I was a sophomore at the University of Minnesota before I saw a teacher who looked like me, and it changed everything. So there are so many things that are possible when our young people see their full potential in their classrooms, but also for non-Native students to know the history of the place that they live, that we are contemporary people. And so the lessons, or the 15-minute preamble that as Indigenous people we have to give oftentimes when we're talking to non-Natives about issues that are important to us, that we won't have to do that anymore, because our young people will simply know the history of the state and who lives here and who has always been here.
I also want to ask you about Line 3 and climate change and kind of the stuff on the ground with that in Minnesota.
This has been one of the most difficult years of my life, and certainly because of the pandemic, but also because of Line 3. I have been very clear that it is not something that I supported, and have reiterated that over and over again. I've been focused on the things that I can do, which we just talked a bit about, Mark. And I truly believe, as I said previously, that having more Native people at the table is a good thing, and we will be able to continue to see positive impacts on our communities through that participation. This has been hard, and I'm going to focus on the places where I do have the ability to shift and change conversations and to get results for our people. So that's why I'm sticking around.
Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, thank you. Now let's take a look at the political scene in Canada. Michelle Friesen is making history with her win for a seat on the Whitehorse City Council in the Yukon Territory. Sarah Connors from the Aboriginal People's Television Network gives us a look at the newly elected councillor.
Michelle Friesen is one of 17 candidates running for Whitehorse City Council. But she's not your average politician.
I'm the first Indigenous person to do so in almost 30 years.
Friesen's family is from the Tonquachon Council in Whitehorse. If elected, she'd be the first Indigenous person to serve on council since Ed Schultz in 1991, where he served one 3-year term. Friesen says 30 years on, it's time for an Indigenous council member.
Yeah, I think having diverse perspectives is really vital to any leadership, and I hope that I can bring that to City Council.
Friesen previously ran for the NDP for Whitehorse's Mountain View riding during the 2021 territorial election. She lost to Liberal incumbent Jeannie McLean, but she says the experience gave her the confidence to run for council.
That was one of the things that really helped me in understanding where people saw those leadership qualities in me, and that made me feel more confident to step into this realm.
The issues Friesen's focused on are affordable housing, accessibility, and climate change.
I'm Michelle Friesen, and I'm running for Whitehorse City Council.
With voters heading to the polls on Thursday, Friesen is wrapping up her campaign. She hopes running for council will inspire other Indigenous Yukoners to do the same in the future.
Yeah, I hope that by stepping forward, I can encourage diversity in leadership and inspire other women and Indigenous youth to see that we can and we should be in these spaces where decisions about our future is being made.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Friesen got the second highest number of votes to win her election. She is the first Indigenous woman to be elected to the Whitehorse City Council. When we come back, we'll take a look at the legacy of 3 Native leaders. Tribal nations lost 3 incredible leaders and a lot of history over the past few days. Earl Old Person from Montana's Blackfeet Nation, Ed Driving Hawk from South Dakota, and Leon Cook from Minnesota. All 3 men were once president of the National Congress of American Indians. Joining me in a conversation about these leaders is Holly Cook Macarro. She's a partner with Spirt Rock Consulting and is a regular contributor to our news program. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to see you.
Normally you join us to talk about politics and policy, but we thought we'd start with some of these memories. And I'm struck by, particularly starting with Earl Old Person, he was elected at a time when termination was still the defining policy of the United States, and it really captured a lot of his thinking going forward. He was one of the few tribal leaders, for example, to be opposed to the Indian Self-Determination Act.
Yes, and I think the time that Earl, Old Person, Lee Cook, Ed Driving Hawk, it was really such a historic era for Indian country and laid the foundations for so much of what we do today. And there was even, I think, a little bit of a changing of the guard between when Earl Old Person, who was the president of NCAI previous to Lee Cook, and then Ed Driving Hawk a few years later in the 70s. And in regards to what you say was the termination policy that Earl Old Person was when he was elected NCAI president, and then going into the Nixon administration, where Commissioner Louis Bruce at the time, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, said termination is dead. That was a huge shift in policy. I know that some of those changes had to be a little scary for tribal leaders back in the day, not knowing what the implementation of tribal self-determination might look like, or the removal of the federal government from running these programs. What would that look like? Would there be a loss for Indian country? Would there be a loss of funding? How would all of those things develop? So I have to imagine, and having had the terrific opportunity to visit with Earl Old Person a few times over the years, I know that his wisdom in looking at that, there was rightful, I think, trepidation about what the impacts of this new self-determination policy from the federal government might be back in that time period.
The irony, of course, is that it was a Blackfeet tribal member who wrote the law, so it really showed some of the complexity. I want to ask you about both Lee Cook and Ed Driving Hawk, because as you say, they come later. What were some of the challenges they faced?
I want to share a bit of a story about Lee Cook and who was my godfather and a first cousin to my dad. They both lost their parents early, so they were essentially raised in what we call back of town in Red Lake as brothers. Always an uncle to me, and I grew up seeing these pictures of Lee with all of the politicals from the day, the vice president, Humphrey, all of those, and really very inspiring. But it wasn't until I was older that I really learned a lot more about that time period, about 1970, 71. And it was the Nixon administration. Lee Cook beat Earl Old Person for the presidency of the National Congress of American Indians. But he had when he won that election, he had just come out of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I looked back at a New York Times article. And my favorite line from it was that Lee Cook resigned in disgust. And it was really a time period when Louis Bruce brought in 14 young Native Americans to essentially replace what was a mostly white establishment bureaucracy running Indian programs within the walls. So those same bureaucrats did not make those halls of interior very friendly. They They were called, as I said, the Fearless 14. They were called the Katzenjammer Kids, which I think was meant to be derogatory, but those 14 just ran with it. It was Ernie Stevens, Sandy McNabb, Lee Cook, Browning Pipestem, Wilma Victor. I went through in talking with Suzanne Harjo, all of these folks, and they really brought in and helped usher in this new era of self-determination. When they were brought in by Louis Bruce, it was just a year after Nixon had delivered his message to Congress about self-determination for tribes. So that era, and I don't know that a lot of Indian country looks back at how foundational that time period was. What came out of that era in 1975 was the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, which just last session, the Supreme Court debated a definition in. So what those tribal leaders did back in the day, really, I think we see the fruits of, and we continue to see the implementation of all of those successfully in Indian country today.
Holly Cook Macarro, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. For all the news anytime, go to IndianCountryToday.com. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.